their land across the sea, where man and woman live happy, but may home go always be Guyana.
It is my privilege and honor on behalf of the Burnham Foundation to welcome you to this another symposium of the foundation. We have traditionally held symposium to commemorate the birth anniversary of the founding leader, in whose honor and name the foundation exists. On this occasion, however, there is an additional dimension to the symposium, because since we last assembly such a symposium, our patron, founding patron, late Elvin McDavid, passed from the earthly plane. His passing, however, was not in Guyana, and because of the absence of most, if not all, of his close relatives from Guyana, he was not interred here. In fact, I may be slightly mistaken to say he was not interred here, because all intents and purposes, he was cremated, and his last wish to have his ashes spread over Kimbia is still to be fulfilled, but the ashes have not yet been returned again. The foundation therefore felt it would be remiss of us to have a symposium and not to pay respects to our departed patron. So we decided that on this occasion we will proceed with the normal activity, but add to it a memorial activity, because of the passing of our patron. And so you will observe that we have styled the symposium Elvin McDavid Memorial Symposium. It also seeks to, as usual, commemorate the birth anniversary, and on this occasion, the 92nd birth anniversary of the founding leader of the People's National Congress, for the first executive president of the Republic, and the person whose name the foundation exists. I will therefore like to ask you to join us in a moment of silence and observance of the passing of our patron. Please stand for a moment of silence. May his soul rest in peace. Fellow members of the head table, Congress on. As I said earlier, we are congregated for an activity that has two elements: a memorial element and a commemorative that we could do this is an indication of the relationship between two gentlemen who've gone at the far beyond. In fact, it is still being that has occasioned our presence. The Burnham Foundation, as is pretty obvious, is an organization that seeks to commemorate the life of Linden and Sampson Burnham. And the person who brought this foundation into existence is Mr. Elvin McDavid. And so, in respect to the foundation, the two are almost inseparable. We are therefore grateful that you are taking time off to be with us this afternoon as we engage in this activity. If I were to refer to myself in that regard, I would say that I have not taken time off because what I'm doing is what should be a part of my schedule. But for those of you who had to make a choice, we're grateful that you've taken time off. We have been in touch with the relatives, the family of Mr. McDavid. Unfortunately, they could not be here. As I've already said, they are almost all overseas. However, they do have, in parochial terms, family members who are here. And in that regard, they have asked Justice Brazelton Reynolds to sit in for the family, and we were therefore like to welcome his presence. It may be coincidental or true, but in many instances, much of the work that was done by Mr. McDavid was also shared by someone else who is in our midst, none other than the leader of the People's National Congress before and leader of the opposition, retired Brigadier Bridge. I encourage him to be as a minister. I have absolutely no doubt about that. But given his relationship with Mr. McDavid, and also Mr. McDavid's relationship with the party which he now leads, I think he had to make a decision that this would have to be a part of his schedule. We are rather fortunate today also to have with us Dr. David Pollard. He does not himself reside in Guyana, at least not permanently, not all the time, but is here at this time. And as you should know, Dr. Pollard is the son-in-law of the late founder. And so we find it quite appropriate to ask him to be the person to do a presentation this evening. A presentation which is quite opportune. I don't know if the foundation has some telepathic capacity, but when we decided on the topic we wanted to deal with, no decision had been made about the alliance between the AFC and the APNU, the Party. So no decision had been made. We were bold enough to say here because of engagement in Antigua during this period. He is in Antigua right now from the 19th to the 25th. On an engagement, we could not be here. And so we have the fortune of someone else also not from here. They've been readily agreeing to do the research and to make the presentation. And so hopefully this evening, even as we experience sad moments of the passing and tributes to the patron, we have a treat in terms of the thoughts of Burnham, the journey of Burnham, in relation to things that are still present. And indeed, that is what the foundation is about. Foundation is about how do we still relate the ideas of Burnham to Guyana and today? For as he said by many, that he was before his time. And if he was before his time, then this is also his time, because his ideas are still alive, still at work, and still influencing what happens in our country. And so we welcome you to this, hopefully, treat on this matter this evening. So in the sense of the program, we'll be divided into two parts. The memorial aspect first, and then we'll go into the commemorative aspect thereafter. In that regard, therefore, I would like to welcome to the podium Miss Nicole Cole, who is the Vice Chairperson of the Forbes Foundation, and who is herself probably the longest serving member in the foundation at this time.
Good afternoon. Siawa, Mizanaya. That's my name. Good afternoon. How are you? Elvin McDavid, an serving and faithful disciple of the late founder, Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham, was driven by his commitment to Burnham and his ideals to found the Burnham Foundation after the death of the founder. He wanted to ensure the preservation of the legacy of the founder. This was almost his singular endeavor in the latter part of his life. Today, we of the Burnham Foundation are assembled to eulogize Elvin McDavid, our founder, deceased in September of 2014. I had the privilege of working with the patron from the very inception of the foundation, and among many others was tasked to mobilize members. My constituency was the University of Guyana. In his endeavor to keep the legacy of Burnham alive, the patron shared with us his knowledge of the life and works of the founder. He educated us on Burnham's vision for Guyana and acquainted us with the institutions such as National Service, National Insurance, CARIFESTA, and many other that Burnham founded, and the guiding principles that informed their establishment. The patron was himself involved in the articulation and implementation of Burnham's idea, National Service and CARIFESTA being two such instances. Those experiences undoubtedly gave him the knowledge and skill that he used in the formation of the Burnham Foundation. In that pursuit, he also engaged in and encouraged outreach in an effort to establish the presence of the foundation beyond Georgetown. That we are assembled here today is both evidence of the foundation that the patron laid, as much as it is a tribute to his life and dedication to the protection of the image and legacy of the founder. In us, he has ensured his legacy as much as he has particular, we are grateful for having shared him with us. We commit to working with them to keep the foundation, and by extension, his legacy alive. May his soul rest in peace. I thank you.
Then we'll have the tribute from the foundation itself, and one of its long-serving members, and the vice chairperson. I would now like to take the opportunity to welcome to the podium the leader of the People's National Congress Reform, leader of the opposition. But I think more importantly, a close friend and partner of Elvin McDavid to do a tribute on behalf of the People's National Congress Reform.
Thank you, Chairman, Member of Parliament, Carl Burnham, Mayor of Georgetown, Hamilton Green, Chairman of Region 4, Honorable Justice Raskin Reynolds, colleagues at the head table, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here this afternoon. I've known Elvin for 45 years. And I think on this occasion I have to observe the Roman maxim of the dead let not ill be spoken. Elvin is a very complicated person, and over the 45 years that I've known him, I've learned a lot. And I think, I hope that these remarks do justice to his tremendous energy and his love for Forbes Burnham. As you know, he's a former ambassador to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the former High Commissioner to Zambia, and former Minister of Information and Culture. And he died last year, September, at the age of 70. He was a complex man, and he rose to prominence as a political personality and as a protege of the leader of the PNCR, Forbes Burnham, particularly for that 15-year period between 1970 until 1985 when the founder died. Elvin was trained as a political scientist, and he worked during this period, 1970 to 1985, as a public servant, but he specialized in politics, or I should say specialized in political work. Soon after he graduated from the University of Birmingham in 1970, he joined the office of the Prime Minister as a special political assistant, which I regard as his default appointment, because he'd go to some other appointment and he'd always end up again as special political assistant. The period during which he flourished was a very exciting period for Guyana, 1970 to 1985. Lots of things were happening in our political history. There were significant changes in our international relations. There were significant changes in national politics and economic development. Elvin was never far from action. During that period, he was a significant participant, though not always very obvious, but he was a very significant participant. At the height of his political career, he was one of the important decision makers in the People's National Congress. He had a phenomenal capacity for activity. His faith in Forbes Burnham was never questioned. His worldview was profoundly influenced by his commitment to the policies, or his interpretation of the policies of Forbes Burnham, and of course, his loyalty to the person. In fact, he is quoted as saying that Forbes Burnham is the greatest living Guyanese we will ever have. And he had added, as time goes by, it becomes clear that Burnham's policy was correct for his people. Once you care about your people's development, You have nowhere to go but back to Burnham. Those are the words of Elvin, and he believed those words to the letter. Elvin McDavid was instrumental as special political assistant in organizing a remigration scheme to attract Guyanese who were living overseas to come back home to resettle. He also encouraged West Indian students to come here to participate in self-help projects in Guyana. He was then appointed Minister of Information and Culture at the age of 27 years in 1971. And he's credited with much of the preparatory work for the hosting of the first Caribbean Festival of Arts, Carifesta, which was staged over a 3-week period from 25th of August to the 15th of September 1972. And those of you who know what happened know that he planted the tree but didn't reap the fruit. To his surprise, he was removed the year after his appointment, reverting to what they call his default position, a special political assistant. So although he was the youngest, perhaps he had the shortest tour as a minister of the government. We won't go into the reasons for that. But he was a good soldier, and he took the good with the bad. He was appointed coordinator in a secretariat which was established that same year, 1972, to bring into being the Guyana National Service. But then again, planted the tree, but it was Norman McLean who was appointed the first Director General in 1973. Elvin was back to basic position, Special Political Assistant in the Office of the Prime Minister. When, after the Declaration of Sophia, the party established something called the Office of General Secretary, PNC, and Ministry of National Development, Elvin became an executive secretary. And he stayed in that position until 1978, when he was appointed the resident ambassador, the first resident ambassador to the USSR. Those of you who know what was going on in the 1970s, the late 1970s, would know that maybe Carl could explain it better. We were victims of what started as the oil shocks. The price of petroleum soared, and Guyana had a foreign currency problem. So Elvin's big task at that time was really to manage, to some extent, the exchange of Guyanese commodities for equipment. This was also the time when Guyana had modified its international relations and was moving closer to what is called the CMEA, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, otherwise known as Comecon. So Elvin was at the heart of Guyana's negotiations with Comecon in Moscow. And it is something that I think he relished, because he was at heart a socialist, and he was there in the middle of socialism, exchanging bauxite, sugar, rice, and rum for aircraft and vehicles and other heavy machinery. Elvin was also involved, when he came back to Guyana, in something called the Committee for Solidarity and Peace, which was affiliated to the Soviet or the pro-Soviet World Peace Council. These names don't mean anything to Guyanese nowadays. Committee for Solidarity and Peace. But that was an important platform 40 years ago. And it was used for several purposes, not only internationally, allowing Elvin to relate with the Cubans and the other communist embassies in Georgetown, but it was also a means of communicating with the PPP, which had another body called the Guyana Peace Council, which is also affiliated to the World Peace Council. So both the PNC-driven Guyana Committee for Solidarity and Peace and the PPP World Peace Council the PPP's Guyana Peace Council were affiliated to the Soviet World Peace Council. I don't know if that makes sense to Guyanese nowadays. 40 years ago, the lines were very clear. But it served a purpose later on, which I'll come to. Because Elvin was employed by the founder in many ways, which I suppose will never be written, or the story will never be told. But one of the tasks was to make sure that the door to the PPP was never closed. And that door was kept open, and he was able to embark on negotiations, or lead a team which embarked on negotiations aimed at setting up a government of national unity. That is, negotiation between PNC and the PPP at that time. But the idea was to bring these two peace councils together, and that was the cover under which the negotiations took place. Forbes Burnham died unexpectedly on the 6th of August 1985, and his successor, Desmond Hoyt, became president and party leader. This was a life-changing event for Elvin. Elvin was relieved of his responsibility for the talks that had been taking place between the PNC and the PPP. He was also relieved of his appointment as chief political advisor to the president. And he was sent temporarily in exile to Lusaka, Zambia, as High Commissioner for a brief period, which of course signaled the end of his political life in the PNC. After that, he did have a diplomatic appointment on behalf of the United Nations, but he never really served the Guyana government again. In 1999, he was part of the United Nations team in Kosovo. As you know, Kosovo was a part of the Yugoslav Federal Republic, the Federal Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, SFRY. And Kosovo was in the heart of Yugoslavian territory. And as you know, after Tito's death, there was a meltdown in Yugoslavia, and they degenerated, the various components of Yugoslavia degenerated into civil war. So Elvin was appointed as one of the municipal administrators in the so-called state of Kosovo. By the 6th Biennial Congress of our party in August 1985, it became clear that the earth was moving on the Elvin. And this Congress took place a few weeks after the founder's death. As you know, the founder died on the 6th of August, but the Congress was held in the same month, in August 1985. A rift opened between Hammy, who was now the mayor, on a gold and green ticket, and the party leader, Desmond Hoyt. And as you know, at that Congress, Hamilton Green was acclaimed deputy leader of the party from the floor. I don't think anybody could miss the expression on Desmond Hoyt's face when that acclaim was heard. Elvin associated himself with Hamilton Green's faction and under something called the Forum for Democracy, which later evolved into the Good and Green Party, Good and Green for Guyana Party. McDavid, to all intents and purposes, therefore, was out of the party. And McDavid out of the PNC was like a fish out of water. He resumed his university studies in a desultory fashion. I think this is where he met Honorable Justice Reynolds. And then he turned to consultancies. But he was also able, and this will give you an insight into his character, he set up a company called Ponial Associates. And those of you who know the names of his children would know that Ponial is really an acronym for his children's names. And I think that might be his bequest to them. But his great legacy over the last 12 years has been this very foundation that we're celebrating this evening, the Forbes Burnham Foundation, which was established, I think, in 2002, 13 years ago, as a non-governmental organization. And as you know, he was eventually elevated to the position of patron. This foundation is committed to doing what Elvin committed his life to doing, promoting Forbes Burnham's political philosophy, his policies, and his ideas. So, to be brief, Elvin was, as I said, a very complex, or you may want to say complicated character. But he was always driven by a clear worldview. And early in his life, he decided that his function in life was simply, literally, to do Burnham's work. And unless you understand that, you don't understand what drove Elvin. It was a total commitment. I don't think I've ever seen anybody committed as Elvin was. 60 years ago, there was an expression in Guyana called Burnhamite. And I see on this program, at the back of the program, the expression that we surfaced, Burnhamite. Elvin was Burnhamite. Elvin was born in Georgetown on the 10th of June, 1944. The eldest son of Clarence and Elvin McDavid. So you know where he got the Elvin from? It's from Elin, E-L-I-N, his mom. And if you know the relationship between his mom and him, you don't understand a lot about him. A Roman Catholic, he worshipped at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, where he became a senior altar boy. Not an ordinary altar boy, a senior altar boy. He also attended St. Mary's Roman Catholic School and St. Stanislaus College, both of which were run by the Roman Catholic Diocese. He's also a member of the GUIS. If you know 1960s politics, you know the three big youth organizations were the PNCYO, later to become the YSM, the PYO, and the GUIS. Elvin was a member of the GUIS. All good Catholic boys belong to the GUIS those days. But he was also a keen sportsman, and he represented St. Stanislaus College in athletics, in cricket, and in football. You won't believe that, but he was a very keen sportsman. Even when he went to university, he represented the University of Birmingham in athletics. He got his degree in Bachelor of Science at Birmingham. And while there, he was also elected president of the Students' Union. Later on, after his break with President Hoyt, he started to study again, and he went to the University of the West Indies, where he became a tutor, and he became a candidate for his PhD degree, which of course he never completed. Elvin was married 4 times. He's a well-married person. First to Don Ford, then to Tessie Moore, then to Gillian Warmington, and finally to Therese Young. And those unions produced 6 children, and both the wives and the children survived him. As you know, he died on the 24th of September last year while receiving medical attention. May God bless his soul. Thank you.
I'm quite sure by now you recognize how close Brigadier was to Elvin, and how much he knows of Elvin. And really could not ask anyone else in the People's National Congress before to do the task that he has done. In some regards, he's introduced us into the study of politics. For those of you who want to take a lead to understand the complex and intricate person who Elvin McDavid was. But notwithstanding his complexities and intricacies, he's caused us to be here today. So there is some result out of that. But certainly we should be open-eyed now about not only Elvin McDavid, but the era and the politics of which he was a part. I want to be slightly presumptuous to add to and understand that intricacy, to mention but one thing. When Elvin commenced studies in the UK, it was not in political science, it was in engineering. But he couldn't stay that course, not because he wasn't capable, but his personality took him to politics. And so he changed from engineering to politics and never left it thereafter. I would now like to call on Justice Burnham, who the family is asked to do a tribute, a eulogy on their behalf. And again, I think we have a very fitting person. In my relationship with Elvin, which spawned quite a number of years from the 70s, national development out his death. If there was anybody I spoke with about Elvin from time to time, that was the brigadier. And if there was anybody I saw visiting Elvin's place from time to time, it was Justice Burnham. So here we have it. I know it's right, Justice Burnham, who Elvin's son described as Elvin's closest confidant in his latter years, to speak on behalf of the family.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the head table, members of Parliament, Mayor of the City of Georgetown, comrades, ladies and gentlemen all. I was relieved as I sat and listened to Brigadier Grange's presentation. Relieved in the sense that I'm tethered by my remit to read what is really a letter dispatched to me by the third son of the dearly departed founder patron of the foundation, Nicholas McDavid. I was relieved to hear the comprehensive review of who Elvin McDavid was. And so I say what I have to say, the comfort of knowing that you now have a full picture of the man, Elvin Bernard Francis McDavid. Nicholas McDavid, and I should say that the McDavid clan is still in tatters after the sudden, and I still say sudden, notwithstanding Elvin had been ailing for a while, because it really was unexpected at the time Elvin passed. Nicholas has asked me to read these few paragraphs. I would first like to say greetings from Kingston, Jamaica, and apologize for my absence and eventuality which was beyond my control. I would like to salute all gathered here today in honor of my beloved father, Elvin McDavid, and I send an extra heartfelt greetings to those of you here who work with my father and not only respected and admired him, but respected and admired his work and accomplishments. My father always impressed on me that one's accomplishments must speak for itself, that in this life, it is not about how much money or material things one achieves, but what one does with their life in service to one's country and to others. This is one of the many lessons passed on by my father to me, which I shall carry with me always, and will pass on to my unborn son and any sibling of his who might follow him. It is fitting, this honoring of my father, as part of the celebration of the late, great Forbes Burnham's life, as my father was like a son to the founder leader and was his most trusted advisor. Forbes Burnham, like many visionaries, was ahead of his time, and this is why my father saw it fit to lead the charge in the establishment of the Forbes Burnham Foundation, so that Forbes Burnham's legacy and ideas would live on. My father, even if I were to say so myself, was the architect of some of the more important decisions in independent Guyana's political history. These decisions not only helped to shape Guyana, but to shape the region. My father was a lead protagonist in Guyana at the time when Guyana was at the forefront of regionalism. And this spirit resulted in many exciting things spreading from Guyana across the region. A spirit, I dare say, that needs to be reignited. My father spent his last days with an undying passion for Guyana and with an indomitable spirit of nationalism. It was always my father's wish to see a rebuilt and undivided Guyana, to see a Guyana that would retake a prominent role in the international sphere, and for Guyana to once again be a place where things happen. This task, he closes in saying, is left to those who still believe and to the untainted future generations. Nicholas McDavid. Mr. Chairman, while it is outside of my remit this afternoon, I would wish, having regard to the circumstance, to crave your indulgence to make a few remarks of my own in tribute to a fallen soldier whom, in my own view, has gone way too soon, notwithstanding his 70. I first came to know Elvin Francis McDavid sometime around 1986, 1987, while in my final academic year at law school in Trinidad. Elvin at the time, as Elvin would be, was a registered PhD student in government at the Mona campus of UW, but was tutoring in political science at the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies. Forbes Burnham, as we all know, had by then been called to higher service. But Elvin, I am to say, continued to be stupefied by the vacuum which the founder leader's departure had created in his life. We were neighbors at the Farrer Flats on Gordon Street, and he made my acquaintance once he learned that I was a serving Guyana Defense Force officer. I had great fun teasing Elvin about his politics. He thought that I should become more political. I assured him that I was comfortable as a serving officer, though I enjoyed the debates we had when he took me on about some of the postulates I made in my thesis in partial submission of my degree program titled Socialism, the Guyana Experience, a Revolution in Reverse. As with most men who ventured into the political arena, Elvin had several several sides to him. No doubt, Elvin's dominant self was his political one. Speaking for myself, I do believe that Elvin was so deeply infatuated with Forbes Burnham, and more particularly, Burnham's uncanny style of man management, that he lived out the rest of his own life in denial of the fact of Burnham's death. In his twilight months here in Guyana before he left for Jamaica, as Elvin bravely battled near blindness and the progressive loss of his short-term memory, owing to the several hypoglycemic episodes he had suffered here, Elvin showed what I do believe. He showed himself for who he truly was. Loyalty was unquestionably one of Elvin's stronger character traits. Whatever else is said of him, Elvin was a true friend, a true and loyal friend to his friends. And once he shed his political cloak, the real Elvin came to the fore. Outside of the political arena, and this is in the environment in which we became friends, Elvin was really a very simple man. Indeed, it is this very simplicity to the point of naivety which I do believe facilitated and created the enabling environment for his untimely demise. While I do believe, while I do know, I learned a lot about life through my friendship with Elvin McDavid, I do strongly believe that it is from the nature and circumstance of his untimely passing that I have gleaned the greatest lessons. We, and that is those of us who know him well enough, can honor Elvin by sparing a thought for our own legacies as we drift inexorably towards our own finality. Indeed, it is a fitting tribute and a credit to the Burnham Foundation that they should honor the memory of Elvin Bernard Francis McDavid on the birth anniversary of his mentor. I do believe that recent events in Guyana are playing out a dream that Elvin dreamed for this country. May his soul rest in eternal peace.
Thank you very much, Justice Reynolds. I'm quite sure that Nicholas will be indicated in his chart of who should represent the family here today. And I'm beginning to wonder if we're not seeing much of Elvin in Nicholas. There is but one element which is very obvious. Nicholas made the point about Elvin regionalism. He himself is a product of that regionalism. Elvin being a Guyanese and his mother being a Jamaican. So I think the study of Elvin McDavid has begun. The study of that political personality who's been described in so many ways. And much of which I think I can appreciate and agree with. May his soul indeed rest in peace and not be tormented by the ongoing thought of his being that will follow hereafter. On your program, we have a cultural item that will not be Burnham made the point. Here we are on Burnham's birthday, commemorating Burnham, memorializing Elvin, but seeing that the two beings are really inseparable, and that being of being inseparable is consummated in Forbes Burnham Foundation, found by Elvin, but found for Forbes. And one of the things that Elvin was involved in, Mary spoke about it, was the whole national unity endeavor. And a lot still to be told in terms of the attempts to work with the PPP in those days and the methodologies used, the Peace Council and the Committee for Solidarity and Peace, and how things were unfolded, things which may have gone into pause, but which may be having a new beginning even as we speak. And so within that context, it's indeed a pleasure to invite Dr. David Pollard to speak to this question of national unity from a perspective which he will bring to your attention. He has coined as a subject slightly different to what's required to address what he sees to be what we need to address at this time. Dr. Pollard.
Fellow leader of the party, the mayor, members of the Burnham Foundation, friends and comrades all. As Vincent said, I'm going to speak to a slightly different title than the one published in the agenda. What I'll be talking about today is approaching national unity, then and now. Because as we know, there is as yet no real national unity in Guyana. There have been approaches, and I'd like to speak about the approaches we've had in the past and how they relate to the sudden arrival of a new real prospect, namely the announcement of a coalition to fight the next election. There is a good history of national unity and attempts to achieve it in Guyana over the years. Some of them have been covered well in books. And in one there was a quote about Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham. It was a book about his role in Guyanese life and political economy from 69 to 85. But in the foreword to it, Ken Dans, who may be well known to some of you here, had, I think, a typically Ken Dans type statement about Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham. In it, he conceded that he was a great leader in this way. He said, Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham was a great leader, not necessarily in the sense of being good, but of being consequential. And I think that very much summarizes what we'll see about the consequences of some of the thoughts that Burnham has had over the years, and how even today they are with us, as I suppose Elvin McDavid might have told us. Before I start on the review of what had happened in the past with national unity, I should say a little word about maybe my own views about national unity and when it may be appropriate in a nation's history. And I think a lot of what I think about it can be summarized by the experiences of Winston Churchill during and just after the Second World War. I think we all know that Winston Churchill is considered by many and often wins polls as being the greatest of British men. And certainly his role during the Second World War is held up to us, blood, sweat and tears speech. Everyone knows of the role that he played. And could think of no one who more unified the nation at that time and more represented what it was to be British and the victory that they eventually were able to achieve. Less of us may know that in the election that immediately followed the end of the war ended in Europe in May. There was an election in the UK in July. And at that election, his party was defeated by a massive landslide of almost historic proportions. And the other party came in. And I think to myself, well, he represented and the political movement he represented during the war is as close to national unity as one could want. But look what happened right after. Maybe national unity is a mechanism, a political system for crisis. You know, in a time of war, we come together. In a time of external threat, we come together. But maybe right after that, things can change. As Shaggy would say, you know, that is all fine, but what about the long run? You know, at a time of crisis, we can all get together, but what happens in the long run? And we'll come back to that later. But that's just my views. And what we should do now is maybe look at the history of national unity in Indiana. It's been a persistent rather than a constant theme. And there is, I think, much to learn from it. And indeed, I'm pleased that today, as I speak, there are people in this audience that have been prominent actors in their current approach, to national unity in Indiana. The first real effort of national unity was in the early 70s, 1971. And what seems to have prompted that was the need to nationalize Denver, the bauxite company at the time. The way in which it was being done in 71 was one that effectively required some changes to the Constitution, which required more support in Parliament than the PNC itself possessed. And so Forbes Burnham started negotiations with Chetty Jagan, essentially with the view to securing his commitment to let the Denver nationalization go through. Now, you know, you can reasonably ask, would Chetty really have voted against nationalization anyhow? You know, pretty clearly he would have. But nonetheless, I think Burnham saw that as an opportunity to start to put in place, I suppose, a healing after the troubles in the 60s, and to create a peace plan, as they then called it at the time. Here are some of the elements of this peace plan that was proposed and, in fact, agreed by Burnham and David. One, that the opposition would have representation on all government, corporations, boards, and committees, and that's something I think is true still today. Two, that Dr. Jagan would submit proposals for the creation of a permanent anti-discrimination and anti-corruption committee. Well, we all wish that had happened. Three, wider powers for and reconstitution of the Elections Commission, something that happened many years later. Four, that the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition would meet at least monthly, on a regular basis. Now, that would have been interesting. And then there were various sort of things to do with fair treatment of PPP train carders and various measures for the rice industry and sugar industry and so on. It was actually quite a wide-ranging plan for its time, and like I said, it was something that after negotiation, Forbes Burnham agreed to do. Many were surprised that he did. In the event, some of the elements of it only were implemented, particularly the membership of boards, but a lot of it just died away. It was a peace plan that maybe was ahead of its time, it stands there in history as an example of the kinds of accommodations that were possible, but did not really usher in the new political order that I think both Chetty and LFSB wanted to achieve at that time. So national unity kind of and peace plans went off the agenda for a while, though they did return again in the 70s in 1976, in a period we probably remember when the PPP announced critical support for the government after having boycotted Parliament for 3 years after the 73 elections. What led to the need for some kind of negotiation then and some attempt to form a national unity government was a mixture of factors. Firstly, the PPP itself had by then become quite weakened. They'd been defeated in the 73 election in what they considered controversial circumstances. The organization was racked by defections to the PNC, Chandni Singh, Tika, and the Majids. And there was a general perception of political weakness about that organization. Furthermore, by that time, I think it was quite clear to all and sundry that the PNC was doing socialism in Indiana. And those who had said that Burnham's commitment to socialism at the time was simply lip service were being proved wrong by the very many measures that were being taken. And so there was external pressure from the Soviet bloc, from the Soviets themselves, and from Cuba, for the PPP to recognize that, socialism there's an attempt to make socialist transformation happen in Guyana. And given that you are a Communist Party and committed to the same thing, you should work together with the PNC. And so with a backdrop of all of this, there were negotiations that began to try to create really some kind of modality, some kind of way of working together between the PPP and the PNC. A kind of negotiated, in fact, I think it was an explicitly acclaimed negotiation of national unity. But from the very beginning, I think Forbes Burnham had some concerns about the way in which this process happened. And in the various comments to Congress after the effort had failed later on, both he and Chetty Javid gave their respective views. But one of the points that Burnham made at the time was that the negotiations ended up being, as he put it, it's a cruel distribution of power. So much of this for me, so much of that for you, that kind of thing. And again, as he put it, the starting point in these negotiations that entailed the reaching of understandings or coalition at the leadership level, entailing the distribution of offices and patronage, rather than a more deep-seated, bottom-up or grassroots approach which really built links. In other words, he disliked the top-down nature of the negotiations and what they had led to. And so with some of his concerns to the fore, and with the resistance that rose up in both parties, the PNC and the PPP, because there's this haggling over who gets what and who plays the role and how much you get and how much I get. That, of course, then meant there were many powerful voices who felt they'd be disaffected by this process that led a lot of intra-party resistance to the whole movement. And as a result, the outcome was that those talks in 76 collapsed. And as it turned out then, the whole issue of national unity was not revisited again until the middle of the 80s. The next attempt to form a national unity government was in 1985, and it's, I think, worth thinking a bit about it simply because of the duality that we are trying to achieve in this program by both memorializing Forbes Burnham, but also remembering Elvin McDavid, because it is very true that the leading negotiation, the leading negotiator, the leading person who was pushing and doing the deals that were a part of the 1985 effort was Elvin McDavid. Halim Najid was also a part of that and wrote a very interesting book about the process, but you've heard enough from the people here about the role that Elvin played at various times in this country's history, and that was one of the important ones. The needs for national unity were by then somewhat different. By that time, Guyana's economy had gone through a very, very difficult period. There was a lot of pressure from the West, as the Cold War was playing out to its, as it turned out, its final years. There was a lot of pressure for a change of the economic model to leave socialist transformation behind. The Soviet bloc itself was in transition, this glasnost and perestroika starting there, and economically they were in no position to support states that were part of their bloc. And so we become more and more dependent on the West and therefore more and more open to their pressure. And Forbes Burnham felt that in order to resist these external pressures to the whole socialist project, he and the PPP needed to form a government of national unity. Only together, he felt, would we be able to resist the constant pressures that the country faced externally. Also, the perennial problem with Guyanese politics, namely the ethnic divide, was a target of this effort, because it was perceived that the ethnic divide in Guyana had also been one of the underpinnings, one of the things that had blocked national unity in the past. And so that dual purpose of to deal, hopefully once and for all, with the ethnic divide, and to come together as a unified force to resist external pressures, those were the reasons for the 1985 negotiations, which were started and carefully guided by Elvin McDavid. What came out of it? Well, it really did not last very long. It did not get very far. The effort was started in effect in 1985, at the beginning of the year, during which, as the leaders reminded us, Forbes Burnham died unexpectedly. And by the stage he had, that he'd got to, the proposed power sharing structure was no more than a few proposals about how various governmental structures should be reorganized. With Forbes Burnham's death and the accession of Desmond Hoyt, and with the role of history and the lessons of history which we'd all learned by then, there was effectively an ideological reform in Guyana, and certainly within the PNC, and that snuffed out in the effort to build a socialist front. I mean, what purpose would it serve in this new world that we were carving? So that was what happened in 1985, and as it turns out then, one would really have to jump forward now to 2015, 30 years forward, to get the next real effort of national unity, of which some of the chief architects are in fact right here with us, so we're blessed in that regard. There was a history. There was an interest in the PNC in shared governance, which I suppose was a precursor to what we now talk of as national unity. It had a theoretical underpinning. People like Sherwin Lowe and James McAllister, Aubrey Norton, all worked on various submissions to constitutional bodies and so on at the time, in the 90s. And those thoughts were actually taken up and accepted within the PNC by the political leadership under Robert Corbyn's tutelage. And so the PNC did adopt a shared governance model as what it was, as a part of its ethos in terms of its political program. And that then led to the search for various political arrangements, especially as we came to the time of election, in an attempt to implement this shared governance. In 2006, you may remember, there was the joint opposition party type arrangement, and the PNC then actually fought under a banner of, I think it was One Guyana, with a number of other smaller parties in attendance. By 2011, there was an explicit reference to national unity in the new broad PNC-based coalition, the A Party for National Unity, APNU, which we know and love today. I'm sure we all know and love that. And so that history has kept the idea of shared governance and national unity alive. And in fact, today we just recently in the last week have had the announcement of a coalition to fight the next upcoming election in May by the APNU and the AFC, and an explicit commitment as a result of their hope for victory to form a government of national unity. And also in the course of the elections it seems to field a truly mixed slate, a multi-party and presumably multiracial slate to the election. The coalition formula, it's worth laying out some of the terms, even though some of the people that wrote those terms are right here and could no doubt speak to them even better. The configuration is one where there'll be an APNU-led presidential candidate, namely Right Honourable David Granger. There will be a Prime Ministerial candidate from the AFC, which seems to be Moses Nakamutu. The APNU will have one Vice President, the AFC 2 Vice Presidents. There's a proposed split of seats, APNU 60%, AFC 40%. There's supposed to be a moderation and dispersal of some of the presidential powers, even in advance of constitutional reform that may seek to make the presidential role more relevant for our times. And there also is a proposal for there to be various enhancements of prime ministerial powers and so on. But in looking at that, it surely brings back to mind some of the issues and concerns that Forbes Burnham raised in '76 when that negotiation was ongoing for the critical support national unity arrangement. And so, in coming towards the end of what I'd like to say, I'd like to comment on the new arrangement, the APNU AFC coalition. And I'd like to comment on it from two perspectives. Firstly, for those of us who are older, there may be many here, for the older person, let me say, Looking at the coalition, we must be thinking, well, if it's not third, maybe it's fourth time lucky, because this is the fourth serious effort that we're making to form a government of national unity. But it does remind us, I'm sure, of the 1976 effort and Burnham's concerns expressed thusly. The issue was not the need for national unity, but rather the means of achieving such unity on a class basis, as he put it at that time. And also in his discussions about the haggling and the negotiations that were necessary to put together the arrangements at that time, and the whole problem he had with a numerical solution. He referred to need and the fact that within each army, as he put it, there were those who pushed the leader for more and more, while the interests of the working class and the country receded more and more into the background. And loyalty to the group, rather than loyalty to the country, becomes a hallmark of politics and political action. However, I think that the situation now is nowhere like as bleak as that those kinds of references might make one to feel. We have, it seems, relatively painlessly got past the business of the numbers. How much for you, how much for me. We agreed on that, it happened quickly. Carl played his role in it, and it was a significant achievement. It didn't cause the breakdown that it did in 76, so that's one tick in the box already. Secondly, there will be, I believe, a great opportunity during the election campaign, which is an intense period of political activity. There must be then a great opportunity for the two partners to this coalition to work together, and that work would have to be at group and grassroots level. So there is a chance there to build the grassroots underpinning of this coalition that Burnham so hampered for and felt he could not achieve in 1976. And I think this is something we should really bear in mind, that the enduring links that will underpin a lasting coalition in or out of power may well be forged during the election campaign if we embrace the need to do so. For the younger voter, for the younger person, I would look at things a little bit differently. For them, I would say, here we have a historic opportunity to achieve national unity out of the box, so to speak, without some kind of retrofitted negotiation after the election. This time, we can put it together before. We have a construct which certainly has some of the key characteristics one would need in a national unity government, particularly it addresses that perennial problem in practice of the racial divide, as the AFC these days brings a significant Indian following with it. And so, this is something that if we can mobilize mass support about, might really just get us there within a few months. May is not very long from now. And that would mean, should it happen, that we would then have a government in power which really had true cross-racial support, which is something we really have never had in the end, if one takes account of adjustments to previous electoral results, and put it that way. So this is a chance for a new political paradigm. This is a chance for us to install in power a truly national party in terms of the support. And sure as eggs is eggs, if that were to happen, it must be so that the PPP itself then, were they in opposition, would have themselves to look at some way to create a genuinely cross-racial grouping, because they'll know that the game is up in terms of fighting on ethnic numbers goes from there. So for the younger person, I would say this is a historic chance. If the APNU and the AFC can work together, especially during the campaign, to build that real consensus as they fight the election, we can have a government of which we can properly all be proud and which can really, I think, move on to get Guyana into a position where we can harness the undoubted wealth of our nation for the good of all of our people. I would say that my own view of how this cross-racial government might come about was quite different, but that's another matter and one I'd be willing to discuss with others in another forum. However, in ending, I'd like to say this. Objectively, we cannot but be impressed by Linden, Forbes, Sampson, Burnham's insights into national unity's promise and complexities. His analysis, especially in relation to the 1976 process, must be considered useful guidance for actors currently engaged in the 2015 Grand Election Coalition. When Kendan said that Burnham was consequential, he was not joking. Even now we see, you bet he was consequential. Forbes.